Hey guys, David here, and it's time for some more iCave answers. I'm at the cafe, so it's not going to be a super edited show, but let's go for it anyway. First up, James Apple asks, will the lockdown in China prevent Apple Silicon Mac Pro from coming out this year? Also, do you think it won't have anything related to the M1 or M2 family of chips, but be based on a new name entirely? Because Apple has a track record of not updating the Mac Pro every single year. That's what Leaker Bob on Twitter said. Now, I have no idea who Leaker Bob is. Exciting nonetheless. However, the Mac Pro has historically been built in the US, but that's when it's being made with components from other manufacturers, so it's not necessarily a kind of like for like, you know, the same sort of stuff that we're potentially going to get with Apple Silicon. I do think it's going to be outside of the M1, M2 family, but it might well still have the same architecture inside, just kind of adjusted slightly. We don't quite know, but I think it might be built in the US. That would also help Apple to kind of keep the leaks down, because I think they are probably better at locking stuff down when it's inside the US as well. Really don't know who Leaker Bob is. Yes, they don't update them every year, but we have heard from Apple that they're planning to update it. One of the guys mentioned it at the last Apple event, so expected this year at least. Next up, Rob O asks, so Apple lied about the M1 Ultra 64 GPU core performance when compared against the nVidia RTX 3090. Instead of being similar to the RTX 3090, is 250% faster on most tests. At the most, the top M1 Ultra is comparable to the RTX 3050 or 3060 depending on the test. How is Apple still able to maintain that the M1 Ultra is better than the RTX 3090? That's not true. It does beat it on certain tests, not all of them, and it isn't 250% faster in any test as far as I can see on the RTX 3090. But bear in mind that almost nothing is enabled for Metal to use these things fully at the moment, so it is a case of there is optimization to be had still. The Ultra is actually beating the RTX, I believe, on things like Cinebench. I could be wrong on that one, but no, you've also got to remember that these nVidia chips are using like 450 to 500 watts compared to like 120-ish, I think, for the Ultra, so a bit of a difference there. Next up, Team Kinetix asks, iCave answers the iOS aesthetic hasn't changed since iOS 7 in 2013. What's the oldest iPhone that currently has an up-to-date home screen? So if you are looking at what has the kind of current aesthetic and the non-skeuomorphic version, then it's the iPhone 4. That's the first one that was able to do it. The main reason that was the first one able to do it was because it was the first one with a Retina display. The big difference there being that when they went to the iOS 7 aesthetic and the flat design, they also used very thin lines, which would basically have just filled up a lot more of the screen space on something like a 3GS. I still have an iPhone 4. It still looks really, really good using that aesthetic, so yeah, that's the oldest iPhone. You can also do it on the original iPad mini, which is basically an iPad 2, but with a lightning port, which, yeah, both of those will still run iOS 7. I think they go up to about iOS 9, in fact. Also from Team Kinetix, iCave answers, I love the Apple ecosystem. It would take a lot for me to even consider Android or Windows again, but there's one feature I really miss from Google phones, not all Android, just Google Nexus and Pixel branded devices. Automatic call screening is excellent. When an unknown number calls, the device automatically searches for the number and will display who's calling, whether it's a business or a spam call, even if you've never received a call from that number and don't have it in your contacts. Why do you think that other device manufacturers don't implement something similar? Why wouldn't Apple have some kind of automatic call screening other than their maybe Dave suggestions for unknown calls and texts? Such a great quality of life feature. So, the first thing that springs to mind for me is that would potentially be part of their privacy policy stuff, where they don't want to potentially be searching the internet, finding maybe the wrong information, GDPR type stuff, where they're trying to avoid incorrectly kind of identifying a caller. So certain businesses will change numbers. There's a lot of businesses that use kind of randomized numbers when they're calling outwards because they have multiple numbers going out. I can see that it would be a useful feature. I would quite like it. However, I think that's probably, if there's a reason that Apple aren't doing it, that's probably why. It's more about that privacy aspect, I would guess. Alize Nourani asks, You didn't mention any compatibility between Macs. Do you think that all Apple Silicon Macs will be compatible, or would it be something, or might it require something as insane as the M1 Ultra? Now, this was when we were talking about, we did a full video about the different displays and what would be required to support them, and we were talking about 6K at 120 Hz or 5K at 120 Hz. I don't think it would have a problem with running on different Macs. What it might do is drop the display rate on Macs that don't have enough power to actually support it, but then we were also talking about the fact that it could potentially have an M1 or a A13 or an A14 or something like that inside, which could actually interpolate the extra frames and kind of boost that frame rate. Obviously with Apple they tend to use ProMotion, so they're not actually trying to do 120 Hz all the time. It would be kind of bursts of 120 Hz and then stuff dropping back down. The only time it would be is in gaming and things like that, that it would need to have the higher refresh rate constantly. So hopefully that answers the question. I don't think there would be any Macs that couldn't use the displays, but they might not get the full capability of the displays depending on exactly what's required hardware wise to support those refresh rates. It's only like if you were looking at a Windows PC and it can only drive up to a 30 Hz 4K panel externally, for example. It would depend on the power of the system itself. Again from Ali Zain Noorani. Hi Dave, planning on buying a 16-inch MacBook Pro. I've been saving up for a while and will be able to afford it around early to mid 2023. When do you think we could see the new MacBook Pros in 14 and 16 inches? Do you think March 2023 or maybe later that year? I do hope I can get it on launch day as I want the showing off rights. It would be good to have a maxed out M2 Max with 1TB of storage. No other upgrades. I do want to run it until it literally dies, preferably between 8 and 10 years. This will be really helpful for school, then university, in which I need something portable but also want maximum possible performance. I also plan to add some video editing, hopefully 4K at 60, and really want to go into 3D animation and coding. Also really desperate for an upgrade as I'm currently running an Intel Pentium dual core with a crappy integrated graphics. Do you think the 16-inch MacBook Pro is the best choice, or do you have a recommendation for a better device? No Windows machines please, I'm a Final Cut Pro addict. Don't worry, I wasn't going to recommend you anything with Windows. That would be basically a crime against humanity. However, 16-inch MacBook Pro, yes, that's probably the right choice for you. It's about a £200 premium over the, or a $200 premium rather, over the 14-inch model. So I think for the vast majority of people, if portability isn't a huge issue for you, it's probably the right choice anyway, because you get the better thermals, so you will get more performance out of the same chips. That makes a lot of sense. I do think that March 2023 is probably when we're going to see these. There are some other questions coming up later about the release dates where people are hoping that we might see them towards the end of this year. I would be surprised, but I would also be pleasantly surprised, let's say. We have heard rumours that it's going to be spring 2023, which kind of makes sense. That's 18 months. I would love Apple to move towards that 1 year refresh cycle for everything, and I think that is still their plan, but there is a lot of stuff working against them right now. But what you have said there is that you want to run it until it dies, preferably between 8 and 10 years. If you need good performance, you're not going to get good performance after about 5 years from it. So what I would suggest is save up to get this and then start saving straight away again, so that when the next version comes out you can resell this one probably around about 20% hit, and then you're only paying 20% of the value of one of these laptops to keep it going. The other thing is Apple is starting to do corporate kind of I guess rental, leasing, financing schemes where you can basically pay a monthly set fee to keep the laptop, and then as long as you've had it for 3 months you can then upgrade whenever the next version comes out, and just keep paying your subscription. That might work out better for you, because then you get the best possible performance all the time. Marcin Kowalczyk asks, iCave answers, Overkill answers, do you think the Studio Display will ever get its software unlocked, at least partial functionality of iOS, possibly different branded? The current config seems overkill so much that it makes no sense to constrain it to only a display single product. So for this, I don't think you're going to see the display itself running different software. That doesn't make too much sense. I understand it's got an A13 inside. You wouldn't necessarily want to buy a product that just had A13 inside. Yes, we've got iPads with that, but those are running like a 2160p, a lower resolution display, so they're not using as much of the hardware capacity for running the display itself. Whereas with this, you're trying to run 5K's worth of pixels. I think it's really more for management and for making sure that the cameras and things like that are working. I don't think you're going to see it as a kind of standalone device. That's my thought, at least. NH asks, ICave answers, M2 seems to be on the horizon. Will Apple be ready to do a yearly refresh with Pro and Max chips released in the fall of 2022? Should we expect a chip refresh for the MacBook Pros in late 2022? I think that was Apple's plan. I don't think it's what's going to happen. I think what Apple would love to do is have the iPhone chips come out in the autumn, along with the M1 chips then the following spring, and the M1 Pro chip in the autumn, and then restart the cycle, because that autumn you'll also get the next iPhone chip come out, and then the M1, then the M2, and then the M2 Pro and Max, and then the iPhone chip, and then the M3, and then the M3 Pro and Max. That would be my thought on what they would like to do, to be able to have that annual update cycle, because that's basically what they had with Intel for at least the mainstream devices. What Apple should probably start to do is try to unify kind of the whole board, rather than having a board that is bigger for the 16-inch MacBook Pro than the 14-inch MacBook Pro. Use the same board in both, so that they can then have a basic switch out, and all they do is put a bit of extra battery in along the other side. Things like that would just make economies of scale much better. Same with the iPads, the iPad Air, the iPad Mini could easily use the same board if they were both using the A15. Obviously the iPad Air is now using an M1, so that seems unlikely, but the same board could then be used for the iPad Air and the iPad Pro 11-inch and the iPad Pro 12.9-inch, because the processor on it is the same. So they could just literally move those down and rearrange batteries around them. That would actually make these productions much simpler, and then external boards for the USB ports, that kind of thing. That is the way that I think Apple could streamline their production a little bit, but let me know what challenges you think I'm missing here. Randomness R asks, ICave answers, I love the Apple community and love staying up to date with leaks and rumours. I would love to start my own YouTube channel / podcast, but the space is so saturated, it seems like everyone is doing it nowadays. How do you stand out? Plus, any tips on how to edit videos and stuff? I've never done it before, but maybe you can make a video to walk us through it and your process. So, in terms of saturation, nope. There is abundance. There's huge numbers of people that want to watch videos about this. People don't watch iUpdate and then go, oh, I'm not going to watch iCave Dave because I've already watched this video. Most people are looking for more content around the same stuff that they like already. So the fact that there are a lot of people talking about Apple stuff and talking about tech in general is because there is an appetite for tech videos. If you are good, you will do well. The one thing you've got unique is the fact that it's you and your personality. If you just dryly read the news and you don't add your spin on things, then yes, it will be dull, and people have no real reason to listen. But if it's your take on the news, you read the news and then you tell people why it's important or what this could mean, and it's your interpretation, that's the important part. And also community engagement. That's why I do iCave Answers. That's why we go through all this stuff. It's because talking through this stuff is the more interesting part of it, and chatting through what people are interested in. Evan Rogers, iCave Answers, can we do another round of desk setups? Sure. You guys just need to send them to me. Hit me up on Twitter, it's at @icave_Dave, or tag me on Instagram if you've got posts of them, and we will feature them. No problems at all, but you just need to let me know what you've got on your desk, and we'll do another quick tour of mine because it's changed a bit again. And Thomas Rundle, iCave Answers, a bit of an unusual one for you today, but I just can't get my head around it. Morning Show Season 1, Episode 8. How does Mitch go from being disgraced in Episode 7 to being back on the show in Episode 8, with no increase in popularity, just straight from the bottom right to the top again? Thanks. Honestly can't remember, it's been a while. Guys, if you remember this, hit me up in the comments, but was it not a flashback? Is it not just like they were flashing back to when he was there before? Maybe I'm confusing myself, but let me know down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching this, guys. If you've got a question for a future iCave Answers show, hashtag iCave Answers down in the comment section with your question, and we'll answer it. Thanks so much for being here, and cheers with a little coffee.